You'd think working on one of the biggest movie franchises of all time would make actors nothing but smiles. Yet, some of the biggest names in the Harry Potter series actually had parts of the job they hated. Let's take the train back to Hogwarts and find out more. Mr. Potter himself, Daniel Radcliffe, was not only first on the call sheet, but also first on the list of actors who struggled with the movies. But to be honest, when you think about some of Daniel's reasons, they make sense. For starters, there were some specific scenes he struggled with, like in The Goblet of Fire. He has to pretend to fall from the top of the castle while being chased by a dragon. Now, before you start shouting at the screen, I'm aware both the castle and the dragon were CGI, but they still had to put Radcliffe on a wire and drop him really fast to make it look real.
Because it was very, very physical.
And what is real is that it scared the living daylights out of him. And speaking of uncomfortable scenes, he also didn't particularly enjoy all the Quidditch scenes. Not because of the heights, but because they'd strap him to a broomstick for hours and hours. And as you can imagine, the broomstick was in a fairly sensitive area of his body. We'll just leave it there. Radcliffe also had issues with the process as a whole. He and the other child actors had basically zero acting experience going in, so they were learning how to act while doing it in front of an entire set full of cast and crew and on camera for the world to see. It was arguably the most anticipated series of all time, too. That's a lot of pressure for an actor, regardless of age. So he avoids watching the movies unless he has to.
I see them at the premiere, and then if I can, I avoid ever watching them again.
You avoid them?
Yes.
Because when Daniel does look back at the early movies especially, he gets really frustrated at his performances. He's on record saying that when he watches them, he sees himself making acting mistakes that everyone makes at the beginning of their career. But unlike everyone else, he didn't get to make them in an acting class or a rehearsal room. Instead, they're permanently out there for the world to see.
I think it would just be, it's like passing around baby photos of yourself. It's not an enjoyable experience.
But his issues with his acting go further than that. Even as far as the 6th movie, The Half-Blood Prince, he doesn't like his performance. He's called it one note and accuses himself of being complacent about the process. Though I should note he had nice things to say about what he did in the Order of the Phoenix. So that's something. But unfortunately, the issues for Daniel extended to more than just cringing at the movies. The pressure of the gig actually led to him developing a drinking problem. He's talked about having an addictive personality, and the scrutiny and pressures of being the one and only Harry Potter definitely made that side of him come out. He was drinking every day, and not just casual sips. He did make sure to say he was never drinking while he filmed the movies. And fortunately, he was able to get the problem under control and quit drinking altogether in 2010. As we all know, Daniel wasn't the only kid actor having to learn how to act while on camera. Emma Watson has talked about having the same frustration as Daniel, only with an added twist. Early on, as Emma was filming, she had a kind of hilarious habit of mouthing along to everyone else's lines as they said them.
A stone that may skull and stops you from dying. No wonder Snape's after it.
Which, to be honest, is a total Hermione Granger move, am I right?
Leviosa, not Leviosa.
But it wasn't hilarious to Emma.
You laugh. This is actually quite traumatic for me.
She also had issues throughout the series with her independence, or rather, her lack of one. She's talked about how tough it was to basically have every minute of all her days mapped out for her, minute by minute, and how she didn't have any control over it. So she was told when she'd be picked up and brought to the set, when to eat, and when there was enough time between shots for her to use the restroom. It got under her skin so much, she seriously considered leaving the series halfway through. The strain of fame was another factor, and hers was maybe even worse than Daniel Radcliffe's in the sense that she had to deal with a literal stalker. A dude showed up at her school one day trying to find her, and from then on she had to hire private bodyguards to protect her. Like Radcliffe, Emma also had particular movies and scenes she hated shooting. For starters, she talked about how the shoot for Deathly Hallows Part 1 involved a ton of outdoor shots that took forever. It was a grueling process that was just a little too intense for Emma. But she even had issues with some indoor scenes too, like when she had to wear a dress and enter the ballroom to dance with Victor Crumb. She got so flummoxed with all the directions that the director was shouting at her, she ended up falling down the stairs. Oof. And maybe the hardest shot for her was inside the Chamber of Secrets in Deathly Hallows Part 2, not because of anything physically rigorous, but because she had to kiss Rupert Grint, aka Ron Weasley. The two were close friends and had been basically growing up together on set, so to her it felt like kissing a sibling. Hey, you know what feels like the opposite of kissing a sibling? Subscribing to the channel, just saying. Anyway, Emma wasn't alone in that particular feeling. Rupert talked about how strange it was to kiss his friend and that they were both super self-conscious as they slowly leaned in. He said he was relieved when it only took him 4 takes to get the shot. And like Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert also had his issues with the Quidditch scenes, for the same uncomfortable reasons. You guys, I think it's safe to say that nobody likes to have trouble sitting after spending hours with a broomstick wedged between their legs. Plus, Ron had the added fun of being smacked one time in the face by a quaffle. I always assumed those were done with CGI, but apparently they're real, so now I'm questioning everything. But that's my own burden, don't worry about me. Rupert also has arachnophobia, aka fear of spiders. So it was not super fun for him to film the scene where he has to face a giant spider, Aragog. Because even though the final product had a CG spider, they still tried some takes with an animatronic one too.
I had a full-on panic attack and we never did it again.
Rupert's also talked about the fact that not only was he never trying to act as a career, but he's also a total introvert. So that's probably not a great combo when you become one of the most famous child actors in the world. He had a really hard time adjusting to his total lack of anonymity, even going so far as to say it's like having a split personality. Like he's almost had to create a different personality in his mind for when he's out and getting bombarded by fans and people taking photos. Yikes. He even talked about quitting acting after the series ended, not necessarily because he didn't enjoy it, but because he felt like he'd missed out on having a normal childhood. So he was just looking to be a real person out in the world for a while. And I'm sure the fact that he had already made several lifetimes worth of money from the movies made the idea of quitting a little less scary. Besides our main trio, there were some other actors who took issue with elements of being in the Potter movies. But he was still super heartthrobby as Cedric Diggory. Sadly, Cedric dies at the hands of Voldemort, and this scene was pretty uncomfortable for Mr. Twilight to film. To make his body contort in the right way for the death to look real, they had to wrap a wire around his groin region, and then they propelled him backwards. It was quite unpleasant on his little Diggories. He also said it was really hard filming all the underwater scenes. Dame Maggie Smith didn't have any underwater scenes, but she still found the whole process unpleasant, and not for reasons you might expect. Smith, aka Professor Minerva McGonagall, is a legend of acting, particularly in Britain. Her issues have less to do with the Harry Potter series itself, and more about movies and TV as mediums. She's such a fanatic for stage acting that she finds movie and TV roles to be pretty unsatisfying, and that includes both the Potter series and her incredible role in Downton Abbey. She also didn't really care for the heavy weight of the hats they had her wear in Harry Potter, but that seems pretty reasonable. Please don't make older folks wear unnecessarily heavy clothing, people. The costuming wasn't too much of a burden on the late great Alan Rickman, but he had other issues. He, of course, played Professor Severus Snape. And despite absolutely nailing the role and endearing himself to a younger generation of fans who don't know about the amazingness of Hans Gruber, he wasn't super happy with his part. After Rickman died, some of his letters were sold at an auction, and in them there were some disparaging things he had written about the journey of Snape over the course of the movies. He apparently felt like one of the directors, David Yates, was abandoning some of the potential character arc for Snape in an effort to simply appeal to teens. Of course, since that's exactly who the movie was marketed to, it's hard to fault Yates for that. Finally, we have John Cleese, one of the most revered comic actors of all time and a member of the legendary Monty Python sketch group. While on Graham Norton's talk show, he was seated next to Taylor Swift,
Harry Potter,
who mentioned what a big fan she was of the Potter movies. Cleese's reaction was pretty dismaying to Taylor, basically slamming the movies.
was awful.
And I can see his point, really. The movies are like 90% CGI, so I can imagine that actors who have been at it for years, acting opposite a green screen or a mop with a head on it might be pretty boring. So apparently making hit movies is not all butterflies and rainbows, you guys. Or maybe I should say it's not all dragons and Patronus charms. Either way, I'm just glad all these actors stuck it out and gave us this awesome series. If you know of any more fun behind-the-scenes info about the actors from Potter, pop them in the comments.